Social media have been intentionally designed as weapons. The FBI and CIA are deeply embedded in all of those platforms.
You have always talked to me about this concept of this fifth generation warfare, this kind of psychological operation.
Palestinian government is calling a war crime.
Hamas does not have the kind of munitions that could do this kind of damage.
The bombing of the hospital was just an amazing example, as you saw in real time. The New York Times flip-flopping and rewriting their cover page in response to the changing narrative that was being manipulated.
A
global locating platform concluded the missile was launched from Gaza.
This is fascinating because as opposed to maybe with COVID, where you were manipulating more members of the public, now you're manipulating nations and their relationships with each other.
By the time the U.S. election rolls around, this is going to be so sophisticated that you will not know what is truth and what is fiction.
We're seeing these companies that want to control that AI narrative, just like Google wants to control every narrative out there. But most of the American public and the global public is out there having everything either indexed or referring to a Wikipedia site, and they believe that is the quote-unquote truth.
With these new technologies and capabilities, they can completely capture and mold information and consensus in a way that has never been possible before. What is sixth generation warfare going to be?
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Robert Malone, the internationally renowned physician, virologist, immunologist, and author. You are credited as the original inventor of mRNA delivery and vaccination as a technology, and have spent much of the last 40 years working on vaccine development with extensive experience in drug repurposing for infectious disease outbreaks. More recently, you've been subjected to censorship and defamation because you have criticized the U.S. government for its methods and standards of bringing vaccines to market in a safe and effective manner. Your mission is to bring back integrity to government, the biological sciences, and medicine. You ultimately believe that the White House has been corrupted by the medical industrial complex and that we are living through an information war where truth has become the victim. Dr. Malone, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I guess this is our third or fourth.
I think it's our fourth. We did two remote, one in London, and maybe another one in London next month if you're here.
I hope so.
It's always great to have these conversations. And look, Doctor, there's so much to talk about, but I also wanted to get your perspective on, a new barrage of information that the world has received. And that's what's happening over in Israel right now. For the past 1 month, we've seen this major conflict. And so I kind of wanted to start there because I think you view these things through a different lens than many people do. I think when you see this information coming out, you kind of see the way that it's being used to kind of manipulate and get people to act, leaders, populations, et cetera. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on everything that we've seen in that Middle East region for the past month.
So thanks for that lead in. Generally, I don't touch this because it is another third rail, using the metaphor of the tube, I guess. My point of view on this is, number one, it's extraordinarily complex in terms of the ethics, the history, the culture, and I don't see any clear-cut good guys here, and I think most of us can concur. There's the underlying issue of, does Israel have the right to defend itself against the incursion that occurred, which is undeniable, that rather brutal, primitive action took place. And so, but I don't want to go there in terms of who's right and who's wrong. I do believe firmly that Israel has the right to defend itself. Is it overreacting? Has Hamas essentially provoked an overreaction? That seems to be the case, I think, from my point of view. But what I find most fascinating is that what we absolutely have are two highly developed cyber capabilities that have been built over decades, have been unleashed against each other and against the world. And they are very actively manipulating the information space and public perceptions through every possible vehicle they can come up with. And the consequence has been the fragmentation of a lot of constituencies that otherwise previously were fairly cohesive. And now they're torn asunder. They're fragmented, fractured in many ways, and are having difficulty reconciling that internally, which is resulting in yet another major division through local and global cultures, as people are being forced into this binary of A is right and B is wrong, or the other, or B is right and A is wrong, and this binary approach, which is again really quite primitive. The idea that there is an absolute right and an absolute wrong. I think there are fundamental truths, but all of that has been very actively manipulated and obscured. And watching that play out, watching how those technologies and techniques and cyber methods are being deployed, and how malleable the press is. I mean, the bombing of the hospital, or rockets into the hospital, was just an amazing example, as you saw in real time. The New York Times flip-flopping and rewriting their cover page in response to the changing narrative that was being manipulated. That and New York Times is usually highly closely aligned with the intelligence community accepted narrative, and that's a whole nother thing about the historic Operation Mockingbird and the current integration of the New York Times and the Washington Post into that kind of operation. But to see them basically perplexed about which side to take, which narrative to endorse, as opposed to objectively reporting the facts, was, I think, a fascinating case study.
Yeah, you have always talked to me about this concept of this fifth generation warfare, this kind of psychological operation. And like you said, we're really looking at a real-time case study here with a lot of consequences, a new one that's not COVID related, and we can talk about that for sure. And I know you're writing a new book about this. And so, yeah, like you said, it's less important on taking sides. It's more important to observe what's happening. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, this is fascinating because, as opposed to maybe with COVID, where you were manipulating more members of the public, now you're manipulating nations and their relationships with each other and the actions they're taking from a military standpoint, from propaganda, from funding. And so, like you said, what looked like alliances and cohesions before now the tide has gone out, and you're finding out who really is allies and not, and also what the limitations are. That as we see this ground war continuing, we'll see maybe some of that start to fray. So I'm just kind of curious, what you saw as far as, some allies that we thought were there are now breaking down. You mentioned the press, and I know in your new book, you're kind of studying how the CIA has kind of infiltrated the press and academia. What are some of the observations that you make when it comes to the 5G warfare?
So this, I talk and the literature and there are deep experts in this space, which I'm actively trying to learn from and integrate their perceptions. And what they teach is that in 5G warfare or fifth gen warfare, which is information war, and remember what we have here is a mixed war because we have really more second generation warfare all the way through fifth generation warfare because we are fighting. I shouldn't say we. The parties are clearly fighting over territory. They are absolutely using kinetic weapons, but that's then integrated. And on the global stage, they are actively manipulating the information space around them, the cloud of information and belief systems, et cetera, through social media and corporate media, et cetera. And this is a great example of how all that can be integrated. And what we are absolutely seeing is a fracturing and fragmentation of what had become an increasingly cohesive Middle Eastern bloc of calling them allies probably is an overstatement. What we've seen is that there is obviously a large matrix of interacting influence and interests that now are confronting this challenge. It's still this fundamental challenge. What do you do with the Palestinian people? And where do they go? Egypt doesn't want them. Nobody wants them right now. So now Israel is moving aggressively into Gaza, obviously, believing that kinetic warfare and war in urban areas is the path forward. They justify it as the need to eliminate Hamas. I'm reminded that Sun Tzu, in his list of battle strategies, lists urban warfare as the least desirable. He actually cautions against it. But that's that in a way, if you think of this as sort of jujitsu warfare, where the opponents are using, or certainly Hamas can be argued, has basically lured. So this is one narrative, is that Hamas has effectively lured the Israeli Defense Force into a position that then can be weaponized on the global stage as illustrating or augmenting the, let's say, Hamas/Palestinian narrative that they are existing in a open air prison, in a apartheid environment that is being actively manipulated and is ethically inappropriate by the Israelis. But what we're seeing is all of these other major power blocks interacting and using the population of Gaza for their own ends to drive wedges. And remember that we have to step back. The big landscape here that is over the umbrella over all of this is the rise of BRICS and the increasing shift away from petrodollar to another more petroleum, continuing to be a petroleum-centric world in which it can be argued that energy is the ultimate currency, and that power block that is centered around the Middle East that we've always known exists. OPEC illustrated that when I was a young man and we had those crises, that is partially being fractured here as the interests in the area are, what I see is that many of these, I'll call them Arab states or petrostates, are not, they're not well aligned with the Iranian Hamas axis. And of course we know this because Sunnis and Shia, that conflict is ancient. It's millennial, and so this whole thing is splintering that alliance. And you kind of got to sit back and say, hey guys, aren't you paying attention? Who's the winner when the rising power of the Middle East petrostate alliances is being fractured? Well, a case can be made that the winner is the United States government. So it's so complicated. And there's so many competing interests. Of course, the fear that many of us have is that this gets out of hand because we have hotheads. And we have Mr. Netanyahu, who kind of got caught with his shorts down or didn't, depending on the narrative that you want to buy in. Why wasn't the IDF monitoring that fence more accurately, more aggressively? And was, it's so hard to disambiguate all of these interests, which is why I kind of want to step back and just watch and try to learn from the strategies that are being deployed here, rather than diving into the kind of binary of this is good and that's bad, or vice versa. It's way, way more complicated than that. And so the logic that this is all about Gaza and the Palestinians fails when you step back and think about the broader geopolitical aspect of what's going on here. And then there is this kind of apparent chronic need for the American military industrial complex to sustain itself through these small peripheral skirmishes. And if you think about that, the American military industrial complex has got this long history of piloting new warfare technology in these skirmish areas. A case can be made that the Southeast Asia conflict, extended conflict, was in many ways a opportunity to pioneer and develop rotary wing aircraft-based warfare in a jungle environment. The Twitter as a weapon, as I've spoken and written about in the past, was pioneered during Arab Spring. It was absolutely actively deployed during Arab Spring, and I found it validating that in the recent Rogan interview, Elon Musk speaks directly and explicitly that Twitter 1.0, is the way he puts it, is absolutely a cyber weapon. And he makes no bones about it. And it was intended as a weapon, built as a weapon, and then captured. I think he's using the term by the left, and deployed as such. So now we're seeing another level of warfare, another regional conflict that includes an American surrogate that has been very much at the forefront of advancing military technology in all of its embodiments in close cooperation with the United States government. We absolutely will see new warfare technologies piloted in this environment. I don't know what they are. One of the big things that's kind of perplexing about fifth gen warfare is what will supplant it, what will make it obsolete, because that's the history of these. Is if you buy into this construction of generations of warfare, those that think about this in military academies, et cetera, point out that there was technologies which made each of those generations or gradients of warfare obsolete, and or at least less powerful than they were before. I argue that they're all still in play. In the primitive nature of the Hamas attack demonstrates that very well. That earlier generation warfare technology adapted and deployed can still be very effective. But what is sixth generation warfare going to be? And the kinds of things that we might see is deployment of these new generation of robotics. Obviously drone warfare is already being used very actively and aggressively, and is absolutely one of the new generations that will transform warfare. And then we have the rise of artificial intelligence and some of these newer cyber capabilities that we're seeing rolled out on the global stage. But there's still, you can't remember Sun Tzu figured a lot of this stuff out a long time ago. The humans are humans, and they are readily manipulated in a battlefield or warfare is an extension of diplomacy kind of logic. They're actively manipulated in fundamental ways that transcends technology. But I predict that we will see piloting of a new innovation in kinetic warfare during this outbreak. And I suspect that one of the key aspects is going to be the use of drones and drone swarms and that kind of capability, both for surveillance, for targeting, and for direct action. So I think that's how I perceive this is as a learning opportunity. And I don't wish to in any way minimize the human tragedy that's going on or the ethical aspects of what's going on. War is hell. I think we probably can all agree that we hope that this doesn't spread beyond that region, but it already is involving, the movement of the aircraft carriers. The naval aspects of this conflict have yet to emerge, and one of the things that many are watching carefully is, at what point are we going to see the hypersonic technology deployed? And are we going to see a demonstration that traditional navies are increasingly obsolete in the face of that kind of missile technology? And it's as if the United States is just walking right into that with their deployments, almost seeking it. It's almost like a Gulf of Tonkin kind of situation. I have no idea how this is going to play out, but it's extremely volatile.
I mean, it's one of the most fascinating kind of chessboard scenarios we've seen in a long time. Like you said, so many regional players. You got the Sunni Shia, you've got Iran and versus Saudi. You've got the Abraham Accords that were moving along with Qatar and some of the amazing work that Jared Kushner did with Trump. And then obviously Saudi may be about to sign probably some pretty strong backdoor conversations going on there. And then obviously this is the perfect fly in the ointment for Iran to make this power move. And now you've got so much on the line here, including thousands of years of history and religions, petrodollars. And now, of course, if you zoom way out, you can look at the US with the military industrial complex for making more money in innovation and potentially winning if the region is divided from petrodollar standpoint. And then you've got Putin weighing in, you've got nuclear capability from Israel and Russia. And then obviously Iran's trying to develop it, probably doesn't have it. And then I had Colonel McGregor here on a couple days ago, and he said the military is not what it was in 91. And it keeps acting like it is, and it's not. And you alluded to that, as in Navy probably is still living in 30 years ago where it really did have supremacy, but does it now? Like you said, with these hypersonic missiles, is the aircraft carrier really the threat it used to be? And now you've got commandos on the ground in Israel. That's been admitted by U.S. generals. And it's a real tinderbox of what can happen next. And there's a lot on the line. You mentioned the drone technology. I saw some really disturbing footage last night, Robert, where it was a low-tech version of that. A Hamas had a drone in the sky, and you could literally see it hover over Israeli troops that were just sitting on the ground, 20 of them, and it literally just released a bomb that it dropped. And they didn't play the footage past that, but there were going to clearly be casualties from that. These soldiers hadn't thought of that possibility. They were probably just outside of Gaza, and it was just hard to watch. Hard to watch.
Wow. That the IDF would be naive about drone technology. Remember that Iran is supplying drones into the Ukrainian conflict. Iran has had people treat Iran as if it's this backwards bunch of camel riders. This is a powerful nation state with significant natural resource reserves, a deep, long, sophisticated cultural history in terms of politics and geopolitics. This is a culture that identifies its legacy as going back to the Persian Empire and beyond. Long memory of sophisticated political operations on a global stage, and I'm constantly surprised by the immaturity of a lot of the thinking around Iran. This oversimplification. We have this tendency to want to see everything in terms of binaries: good, bad, black, white. And Iran is way more complicated than that. And it's clearly increasingly flexing its muscles. One of the problems with this economic blockade kind of strategy that the United States has deployed in conjunction with global finance is that it's forcing these nation states that have significant geopolitical interests that are being harmed by that strategy. And Russia is obviously one example, but Iran is another one. It's accelerating their ability to adapt to an environment in which global finance is another weapon, and to battle harden themselves. You're creating a more advanced enemy that's resistant to that type of manipulation. This gets back to the logic of free market, if you think about it. When governments manipulate things like this, there are unintended consequences, blowback, that occur in so many different dimensions. And so I just, I think for the likes of you and I, sitting back and observing and trying to learn from this, and I know that you are, much of your activities these days support a large investor community. And I would imagine from an investor point of view, this is both a challenge and opportunity space. I don't mean in any way to minimize the human tragedy and ethics of what's going on, but the larger geopolitical ramifications, particularly as it relates to finance, are profound. And I don't know that any of us can see through. And all of this is occurring at the time you mentioned Putin and the reports of Putin's physical challenges in terms of his own health. We've got so many actors here, and we haven't even touched on China. and their interests. And China, the stated policy that they would love to see the United States dragged into 4 wars simultaneously, and this benefits their interests as it relates to Taiwan. And you can see. You also mentioned the logic that this strange belief that the United States maintains a fiction that they have the level of geopolitical military dominance that they had 2 decades ago. That those times have passed. The other day, I read Doug Casey's International Man. I don't know if that's on your radar, and not to give a shout out, but the other day I was reading an essay in which the line was inserted that kind of just rang my bells. The assertion was made that Russia now has the most powerful military, more powerful than the United States. And one of the underlying observations is that the Russian military industrial complex provides much more value per money. They don't have the corrupt integration into the government in the monopolization that has occurred in the United States military industrial complex. So a case can be made that the United States is paying about tenfold over what the Russian government is paying, excuse me, for equivalent technology or capabilities. And that's not sustainable. As you know, when you just think about this from an economic standpoint, and somebody make a solid case that war is really about economic battle, and that the economics underlying warfare are really the primary determinant of who will eventually win. And clearly, the United States has lost a lot of its manufacturing base, and willingly given it to the Chinese under the Clinton strategy that the future is in service industry, now we're facing the consequences, and essentially this Gaza conflict is playing right into the Chinese strategy. All they have to do is sit back and watch the West kill itself, and then they can act as the grown-ups and step into the. Looking forward, who's going to be the peacemaker here? It could well be that it's going to be the CCP is going to step in as the grown-up in this environment and act as the broker, and in so doing, further leverage their global geopolitical position. It's just such a mess.
That would be a major coup to do that. And it would really put the U.S. in their place, because they pretty much brokered pretty much everything over the past 75 years. So, there's so much on the line here. And like you said, when you kind of censor the currencies of the Russians and the Iranians, you force them into adopting and joining the BRICS nations, and you force them into now being able to adapt to these new challenging environments of economic warfare. And guess what? They find solutions. And
yes. They're not stupid.
No, they're not
They're
stupid.
very sophisticated cultures.
Yeah, and you're training them. And again, like there was an assassination by Mossad a couple of years ago where they had a remote control gun that was in a pickup truck that killed one of the Iranian nuclear scientists. It was a serious operation. And they're not doing that because they got nothing better to do. They're doing that because, Iran was a major threat of developing this weapon, something that's not easy to do. So, but I agree with you. The narrative, I guess, coming from the West is, it's kind of this low-tech environment over there and unsophisticated, but clearly not. Those Hamas operatives were clearly trained somewhere other than Gaza when they went in for that operation, and that was probably done with some bigger partners. I want to ask you real quickly, Robert, about the information war, because there was an article, I think, in the New York Times yesterday that talked about a bunch of the imagery that we're seeing coming out of Gaza. And they traced it back to images that were actually from 10 years ago in Syria, from 12 years ago in Syria. There was one where there was like something in 2015 that happened in South America where like a young girl was like beaten up by a crowd. And they were now being reattributed to things that had happened in the past few days in Gaza. And, it's one thing to have the war, but obviously the information war or the magnification of that can be sometimes much more important. We saw Netanyahu publishing these kind of massive kill shots days after the invasion into Israel to kind of, I think, show his own citizens that he was doing the right thing or he was doing something. They even had a name for it where they were showing these buildings being blown up. Now, he's probably toned that down a little bit now, but can you speak about this aspect? And for anyone watching and listening, maybe it's good for them to know that they're being bombarded with images and narratives, and that can be the bulk of what's going on here because we're now waging a war of attention. And in contrast to that is the Ukraine war, which now has gone from front page news to back page news. And if that stays that way, their funding is going to disappear as well. And maybe if you could just speak.
I would say disappearing. It's already in progress. I think Zelensky is now in an end game. And it's a good thing for him that he's bought all these, whatever they are, DACAs or whatever, however you want to call it, these estates scattered across the world, because I think he's going to have to get out of Dodge pretty soon, because this is not sustainable. The Congress is aware that they're bankrupt. So let's see. If I got distracted by as you mentioned Ukraine. Reel me back and where you
just because you talk about the 5G warfare, but the imagery that we're bombarded with,
right? And so we're now this is, I think, one of the biggest threats, and I refer to this. I didn't, we're still trying to work out language. We're in a postmodern environment where truth is entirely subjective, and it is accelerating under the influence of deepfake technology. So very soon we're going to be in an environment, and it's still fairly crude. Somebody from the UK took a great GB News interview that I did and was using that. They cloned my voice and were using it in a fairly crude deepfake in which I was endorsing a product. I'm not going to mention the product because then that would be further endorsement, that I'd never even heard of before. And this was brought to my attention. But you could still see that it was a deep fake because it was manipulating this part of my face, and it was asynchronous with some of my other facial expressions. The voice cloning was quite good. That over the next 6 months is going to accelerate to a point where it's going to be extremely difficult to discern what is real and what is not, what is fake or what is manipulated off of other prior imagery, so that we're bombarded with synthetic information in the format that we have our lizard brains react to as if it's real. This imagery, we've been trained through television to believe in images. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and a movie reel is worth, I guess, 1,000,000. To believe in the power of imagery to reflect reality, and that's gone. That is, as you're pointing out, completely an obsolete concept in this information battlefield, and that will only accelerate. When I speak about 5G warfare lately, I use that little clip as an illustration to my audience and say, guys, by the time the U.S. election rolls around, this is going to be so sophisticated that you will not know what is truth and what is fiction. And that's why I assert we're in this postmodern, post-truth environment where truth is entirely subjective. Of course, this underpins what we call wokeism and a lot of the belief system around that reality is a construct, that reality is entirely subjective and truth is entirely subjective. And what it becomes then is an environment in which those who control media, media, capital M broadly writ, that includes social and all forms of information. Those who control that definitely shape reality. They define reality. Reality is that which those who control information media space deem it to be. And there we no longer we live in a post-truth world. It's not just postmodern, it's post-truth. Truth is a synthetic construct, and it's going to be extremely difficult to discern reality in this environment. The thing, and this gets to my core point about Psy-War, that I think the deepest insight I've had, which came off a GB News interview, when, as you know, now in British media, the censorship board requires that everything be framed as a two sides interaction with basically somebody representing the interests of the government. And so I was in one of these interviews, and the very dapper middle-aged man who was serving as my counterpoint made the comment that in Britain, we have these elections, and after an election, power is transferred from the electorate to the government, and the government then acts on behalf of the electorate for the following whatever period of time, 4 years. I know you guys are more fluid about your election periods. And the government is at liberty to do whatever it wishes because it's acting with the authorization of the people, and can act unilaterally during that period until the next election. And when that logic was deployed, I suddenly had, it was a brick to the head moment, that if that government during that period feels comfortable and at liberty to deploy Psy-War technology against the civilian population, then the concept of sovereignty and autonomy and the checking function of an election becomes completely obsolete. Sovereignty is gone. There is no ability of a sovereign people, quote unquote, to serve as a check on the government, because everything they think, hear, feel is synthetically manipulated. And so then the government can completely control that. When they can control the information space and feel comfortable deploying these advanced psychological techniques and technologies, which the UK has largely pioneered through nudge technology, et cetera. You guys have been leaders in this going way back. Then the belief that we have sovereign, autonomous individuals making informed decisions about the direction that they wish their nation state to go becomes completely obsolete. And then what we have is the rise of the power of the bureaucracy. Here in the United States, we increasingly call it the deep state. The UK has had a great run in the comedy series Yes Minister and then Yes Prime Minister that speaks to this overbearing bureaucracy that truly controls the country. But now, with these new technologies and capabilities, they can completely capture and mold information and consensus in a way that has never been possible before. And that's what I find fascinating. In order to try intellectually, just to try to, with this book and otherwise, to try to discern how this is operationalized, I find going back to the disclosures that were made in the 70s about the role of the CIA in manipulating information in the media. It's referred to as Mockingbird. That goes back to 1942. Those strategies and COINTELPRO, which is the disruption campaign that the FBI used against the 60s protesters and Martin Luther King and all that, those approaches are still there. That seems to form the basic underlying strata of how modern, at least Western nation states operate, and probably most well-developed nation states are operating now. But then we have the overlay of these additional capabilities that have been developed. And again, just to loop back, so nice
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.